All right. Good afternoon. I think everything is live, up and running. Let me get everything loaded up and we will jump into the discussion with today's Beatbox Jam stream. I need to fix my modem. All right, we have audio, we have video. I'm sure folks will let me know if I need to tweak anything with the audio, but I think we are good there. So let me kick off the jam stream with kind of an overview about what I want to cover and do today, and then we'll go ahead and get started and waste no time. While the stream was loading up, I put together a real quick background beat, and I'm just going to put it behind me so there's no dead silence. Hopefully that's not too loud. All right, so what are we looking at today? Usually, like I've talked about before on these jam streams, when I'm trying to figure out what I want to talk about when it comes to the beatbox, sound theory, technique, and all sorts of stuff that usually occupies the first half of the stream. I usually think about all of that stuff and trying to figure out what I want to talk about throughout the week before the jam stream, so I'm not scrambling around the day of the stream trying to figure out what I want to talk about. And I came up with a topic that I think might be interesting. I'm not exactly sure what in its entirety I'm going to cover, but it is something I kind of wanted to talk about as far as beatbox tools and sounds go. It'll be kind of like an addendum to the sound inventory discussion we've had a while back. So hopefully people will find that interesting, because hopefully these are things I haven't covered really in depth before as part of these jam streams. And so the sound theory and technique discussions going to revolve around what I consider uncommon sounds in beatboxing, at least for me, in my tool set, and how I use them and how they're created and all that, and how they slot into beat construction. And that should sort of inform the discussion about practicing specifically with the sounds and whatnot. And I think it'll be interesting. It'll be kind of a different topic compared to our usual discussion of basses. We talk a lot about basses here. The discussion about technicality. One particular sound is part of the technicality concept, so it will be related to some of the stuff we've talked about before. But again, hopefully it's interesting. If anything, it'll be a good reference for later. But first, I'm going to start with warm-up. I'll turn this off. I actually kind of like that beat, but we'll get rid of it for now. It's very simple. Also with the setup today, I do have the synthesizer hooked up. It's not on, since the boosts give feedback whenever the synthesizer's hooked up, but it is on. So when we transition over to the BGM brainstorming part of the jam stream today, then I'll be able to turn it on and noodle around with the different things on here per usual. But in the meantime, as a way to, again, continually check sound, I'm going to start with warm-up. Let me change my caption before I forget. Anyway, we'll run through some basic beats to warm up, get the blood flowing, get everything properly primed, and then we will move into the practice and sound theory discussion. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll keep an eye on the audio readouts like I normally do. Make sure none of the sounds are absolutely blasting the sound levels on the mic. Let's go. All right. Kind of went several different places with that string of warm up beats. You might still need a little bit more warm up on my BGM though. Admittedly, like I usually do on the weekends, I did not wake up super early today. In fact, I woke up like an hour before the stream. And so a lot of my face muscles probably aren't as warmed up as they would be if I've been up for like the entirety of the day. But the BGM snare is always the one that requires the most warm up. I don't know, just for me, maybe it's because my lips aren't just used to that type of force first thing in quote unquote my day. But the usually sounds all right. It's functional enough to use whenever I need it. But it always sounds better after it's been warmed up because my BGM snare is relatively sharp. It's one of the snares I drilled the most when I was learning it. But it's the one that requires the most warm up, I find. The rest of them, like the inward outward Ks, those I could do all day long in my sleep, doesn't matter when. Doesn't require warm up. The PF snare, probably in the same category. The don't really require warm up for that one. It's just the BGM. It's just the spit snare. And it's always interesting to me. But I think it'll be fine as we go through and talk about different things. If I need it, it'll be there and should be fine. All right, I'm going to change the caption one more time. Let us move on to sound theory and practice. All right. Sound theory and practice for today. Like I mentioned at the top of the stream, the topic I wanted to talk about it for a bit today when it comes to beatbox, technique, and sound theory is the idea of uncommon sounds in the Beatbox toolkit. And I think person to person, underutilized or uncommon sounds, it's going to vary. Depends on what you learned, how you learned, in what order you learned different techniques. And then it's also going to be affected by your preference for style, genre of music that you like to create. All those factors will kind of affect which sounds you'll tend to gravitate towards more and which sounds you'll gravitate towards less. For example, if you're the type of person who likes a lot of electronic and kind of EDM, techno-ish type sounds, maybe you wouldn't have a lot of sounds you'd hear in a trap beat. It kind of depends because there's a lot of overlap, but you may gravitate towards certain types of sounds, be they basses, snares, hats, or anything that may be more in the wheelhouse of electronic music versus if you were like a hip hop trap person and that was solely what you like to create, you might move towards that particular sound set. But even outside style preferences and genre preferences when it comes to beatboxing, I think it largely comes down to how much brain space you're able to occupy with tools that you know you want to have on demand at all times. And what I mean by that is if you have your go-to sounds that you know you're going to use at any given time to construct a beat, no matter what style or whatever it is, those are going to always be kind of front-loaded on your brain, ready to pull out and use for something at any given time. For me, if I were to think of sounds that I normally have at the front of my brain when I'm creating a pattern, or if someone asks me to freestyle something on the spot, or what have you, whatever. If I have to beatbox and someone says, make something right now, I could think like I'm going to immediately go towards probably like a PF snare, maybe a BGM, or the K's, which is, I know it's like almost the entire spectrum of sounds, but definitely is not all inclusive. But those four, let's call them like a basic 4 snares: inward K, outward K, PF snare, BGM. Usually I'll go towards one of those for a snare sound. Kicks, I don't really do a lot of variation on my kicks. Sometimes I'll do throat kicks, but not super commonly. That might be another one that I don't use a ton. But the regular kicks, just the pretty standard. I think that one's not going to see a ton of variation depending on the person. Hats tend to go for regular closed or open hats. Or open, or sometimes hat runs. I need to practice more hat runs, get better at like 30 seconds. But hats, pretty simple. Snares, pretty simple. Basses, for me, probably throat bass, vibration bass, or vocalized chest. The ones I usually talk about a lot when we go through bass discussion and technique. Those are the ones I tend to go to for my immediate tools. Despite my ability to do inward bass, I'm still not confident in how it sounds, which is why you never hear me use it. Eventually, I'll be comfortable enough with it that it'll start showing up in more patterns. That's what I've been practicing behind the scenes. But that's a tough one. It's the most unusual of all the basses that I could think of that I know that I have at my disposal. And so that roughly covers kind of just a sampling of what, again, it's in my brain, ready to go if someone asks me to beatbox, and then supportive or kind of supplemental sounds thrown in that I tend to use. I do like lip rolls, the regular lip roll, or the inward high, what I call the siren lip rolls, what I tend to do by default now for the inward, and that's not normal. I don't even know if people do that a lot, but it's one that sounds pretty distinct to me, which is why I like to use it. And it usually gets people's ear if they've never seen beatboxing before, because it's kind of unusual for a type of sound. And that's the one, the regular inward lip roll sounds like really punchy, hits pretty hard on a mic. It's considered like a low bass type sound, I think, but it's not a vocalized bass. So it'd be, you heard me do it, a variation of that in the practice beats at the beginning, but the really fun sound. Took me forever to learn, but the one that I do is higher. And it's done just by changing the airflow with the back of your tongue to make the airflow higher, which changes the sound of that inward lip roll when you're doing it. And it sounds like, and I tend to kind of oscillate the pitch down so it goes high and then kind of comes down a little bit, so it sounds like it's a tone. But that high lip roll, again, it's just a variation on the technique. It's nothing really that special, but it sounds different. So you'll hear me doing that in a lot of beats by default, and I do need to get in the habit of not relying specifically on that version, because otherwise it'll just be the only version I ever do, which is not what I want. But the fun sound, I really should ask some pros next time I talk to them how common it is in practice for people to do that. Another variation, again, I did in the practice beats because it's easy to do and it changes the sound of the inward lip roll really dramatically, is I think it's considered a loose inward lip roll. It's not really a sub bass, because sub bass sounds like, it doesn't have a ton of rattle to it. It's like a really low 808 bass kick. It's very, very, to me it sounds round. It doesn't rattle, it doesn't have a lot of distortion, but if you're on a mic with a good sound system and subwoofers, it will shake the entire house because of how powerful it is. But the one I'm talking about that I use pretty frequently is considered again, loose inward lip roll, because it's done in the same position and functions the same way but sounds really different, and that sounds like, it's basically like a sub bass with the reverberation. It's the same tone roughly, but it's got the distortion on it from the lip roll of your lips flapping and oscillating, so that it sounds kind of like almost like a blown out speaker, and it's very heavy. So if I did the same tone, that one I like a lot. It's fun to do. It's not hard, and because it's open, it's the most open lip position of all of the inward lip rolls. You get to get a lot of air back. So like the regular lip roll doesn't rely on lungs at all, and that's the one that just mouth pressure and the corner of your mouth with them. You can breathe in while you're doing it, but if you're just doing the lip motion, doesn't take your lungs to get the sound to come out. The regular inward lip roll, that one does, and you do get air back in your lungs when you're doing that sound because you're breathing in to create it. And I'd say it's in the middle, probably on the lesser side of air intake, just because your tongue is blocking the path, which gets that high pitch sound. The regular one, that's lower in pitch, it sounds like, there we go. That one gets you more. You have your tongue flat on the bottom of your mouth. It's not in the way. But the loose one, your tongue is not part of the sound at all, but your lips are so much more open, which is how you get that low kind of reverberating sound. It's a ton of air intake at once. So if I'm doing something that requires a lot of expulsion of air and intakes of air, doing the low open loose inward lip roll is really good for that. So that's why you'll see me use it a lot. But again, circling back to the idea of the quote unquote common sounds, that more or less covers them. I'm not really a big synth user. That's something I need to learn a bit more and get better at doing synths, like tooth synths and things, because they're really good for creating higher mid-range and high melody type sounds to mix up. Really good for hip hop beats, really good for electronic beats in general. Doing synths, if you've practiced them enough and really refined the sound, can really catch people's ear too, because it sounds like a musical instrument. The closest thing I have to that, probably that I could do well, is trumpet, but synths are a different class of category, and so maybe I could do a thing on synths in the future if I practice them more. That might not be a bad idea. So to tie it back to the discussion of uncommon sounds, I'll have to think of probably a few more on the fly as we go, and maybe they'll come to me quickly. But there was two specific sounds that function in different categories roughly for beatboxing that I know are less common, and I've been trying to work in a little bit more because they sound different from the stuff that's normally the front of my brain is ready to use sounds. And the first one's a technicality pattern, technically. I don't think I've ever seen someone specifically talk about this one, but it's very simple. It's very simple, but it's effective, and I think because it changes the sound of technicality chains, it's something that I'm gonna try and do more just because it's really handy. But it's not hard, so maybe that's why you don't see it get much attention. And that's a pattern I'm calling double K kick or 2K kick. I was trying to think about what to call it because again, it's just combining two sounds. It's just not readily used in my arsenal. And then I started doing it subconsciously in the last, I don't know, month or so. And I thought that's not something I've ever talked about, I don't think, when it comes to technicality. So we're going to talk about it here, and then it'll probably become more prominent as we go. And so the sound itself is 2 K sounds and 2 kicks in its set. It can be adapted depending on the tempo or whatever it is you're doing for the beat itself. But the K sound is just what it sounds like. It's the letter K without any vocalization, and it's not a snare. So it sounds like anybody can make that sound. It's part of like the boots and cats thing that people explain when they're teaching someone who's brand new. The hard C or K sound, when you amplify it more, it becomes more of a snare, and that's how people teach like the boots for a kick and the cats for a K snare. And as a snare, it's more like something like that. But without using that much force, just making the K sounds by itself and chaining it 2 or 3 times. It's 3K, 3Ks, 2 kicks. I'm not calling it a KKK. That's going to get me in trouble. But it's basically a K kick pattern. Maybe we should just call it that. And again, functioning like a technicality pattern, here's what it sounds like. It sounds like, and I did this in the practice beats because I wanted to make sure it was in my brain to talk about, but it's on its own doesn't sound significant. It sounds like 3 kind of random unvocalized sounds and a kick. 2 Ks, 2 kicks, K kick pattern. Very simple, but when plugged into an overall rhythm as part of a filler sound, I find that it hits the ear a little bit differently, and it just sounds like a different filler technicality sound I just don't really hear in a lot of beats. And so the easiest way to demonstrate it would be to put it into a pattern with other snares and demonstrate the way I've been using it. And so a K kick technicality pattern would sound like, and again, it's not complex. It doesn't do a lot of weird high-speed things like a TKK or TKP or anything else. And it doesn't have kind of like a more sharp, distinct sound like pops and clops do. But it's easy to do, and it flows between rhythms extremely well because it's so easy to do. And what I found in practicing it, and why I wanted to mention the K kick sound combo, is because you can work on doing it fast. And just like any other technicality pattern, you start learning how to chain the sounds together, and once it feels natural, you start pairing it with other sounds that flow well, and you start working on getting it faster, more consistent, and working on speed. And I found it works pretty well with the zip because it ends and starts with your lips closed, if you're chaining it like I did in that sample beat. And so you could go, yeah, okay. So the zip is on the front essentially, and then it does 2 Ks, 2 kicks, and repeats, and it cycles the whole thing over. And so just taking that one section, chopping it out on its own, it sounds like kick to start, kick, zip, kick, zip, kick, K, kick, kick. Probably should have written this one out. Anyway, that's what it sounds like, and put into a beat. It sounds like. Same as a sample, but you start pushing it faster and trying to chain the K sounds and everything else just to condense everything and speed the whole beat up. That's when it starts to kind of do interesting things to me. And I'm still working on turning this into a speed pattern, but if I were to push the overall speed and as fast as I can get that chain to come out, it'd probably sound like. You almost lose two of those Ks and they kind of blend into like 1.5 because you're doing it so fast. But again, don't really hear it a ton in beatboxing. Maybe it's just kind of blended into a lot of people's beats that it's not prominent. But I think it's worth talking about when it comes to sounds you just maybe don't even think about, because I don't really use standard K sounds on their own for anything. This was the first time it just sort of happened, and when I was practicing, and I thought that's kind of something unusual that I don't think I've ever really thought about. But again, K kick patterns, just another tool to use when it comes to filling in parts of your rhythm and patterns for technicality. And I haven't really given much thought into chaining that into something else. That's probably the next step once I use it more. But if we're thinking of the, you could do something like that, because I guess technically the TKP and the TKK do have that same K sound, but they're not emphasized in the overall triplet chain as much, but they're there. So you could probably do like TKP, K kick, K kick. Ooh, that's kind of a tough one. That does not feel natural at all. Oh, I'd have to practice that. It kind of creates a stutter because there's more K sounds in that chain than there normally is. Normally there's just one every third pattern. So you could do something like a staggered. Ooh, that's hard. I can't do that naturally. I'd have to practice that. I think we'll put a pin in that particular sound. Next time we talk about technicality, hopefully I'll have some more interesting combinations and permutations with other patterns and see how it fits together. But yeah, K kick pattern, kind of an uncommon one, so I wanted to cover it today in the discussion. Moving on, another sound which I've known how to do, and I think a good portion of people throughout their life have probably learned how to do this sound as well. It's not really practical in everyday use, which is probably why people don't actively just walk down the street doing it. But I think the technical term in beatboxing is the machine gun sound. And it sounds like, it's a very short, sharp sound. It sounds like a rapid fire gun going off in quick succession. And this one I see in trap beats. It functions well because that type of sound is used quickly with that type of snare in a lot of beats. But it's also a beatboxing tool, and it's kind of cool, but I just don't really use it. It's one I've known how to do since before I started beatboxing. But the way you do this one is the same way as doing tongue bass, but it doesn't use your lungs at all. It's all mouth pressure with your tongue vibrating with your teeth closed. I think that's what changes the sound. So if you do like a regular tongue bass, like rolling your tongue, but you close your teeth. Don't clench your jaw tightly, but you close your teeth and force that sound to sort of rattle against the back of your teeth. That's how it goes from the to. It's kind of a cousin to OD bass as well. It's another one that maybe I can talk about in a sec. But the machine gun sound is a very short, sharp sound. You can stretch it out by actually using air pressure with your lungs to kind of force the sound to be longer, but normally you hear it in short bursts. And so putting it into a beat, this one kind of slots in a bit more naturally than the one I was just talking about. But let's say we're doing something a bit slower and you use it as a filler, it would sound like. Yes, technically it is using lung power. Kind of hard to feel because one, I don't do the sound very often, and two, it's a bit more unusual. But I think technically you're using mouth pressure plus lung power to get the air out to get it to do that reverberation. Because regular tongue bass, like the does use lung power. You're breathing outwards. And so for talking about uncommon usages for this machine gun sound, like I did it in the example, to me, it seems like a good filler kind of sound for in between different parts of a beat. Maybe kind of filling a role of technicality. It's not a technical sound, but something you can slot in order to fill up parts of your beat and get it to kind of flow more seamlessly. Or if you're doing kind of like a themed routine or pattern and you want to use it like a literal gun effect, you can definitely do that too. I could see it being used that way. And I think it's one thing I didn't think about because whenever I do it, it tends to be about the duration you heard me do in the example. Just that, but you could technically chop it down to just a few sounds if you wanted to. It's harder to do. You basically have to cut your airflow off so your tongue isn't reverberating for longer than you want it to. So instead of it'd be, you could do that too and then do it rapidly. That would be an entirely different type of practice, but it would create more of a burst. It'd be like using a burst fire on a weapon, I guess. So instead of, it'd be like, which I don't do. I've never done that before, but if you're talking about variations on the sound, you could definitely do that. You just have to be able to control your airflow and cut it off after every, I guess, two shots, as it were. And it would definitely serve that particular purpose pretty well. In fact, I'm probably going to use this stream as a reference in the future when I'm practicing to come back and remember what I talked about with everybody. Because one thing in beatboxing, unless you have everything written down or you kind of write out how you want to practice, it's a lot to keep track of mentally, which is part of the challenge. But just like a wind instrument musician has to keep track of notation, rhythms, musical terminology and styles when they're performing. Same deal for beatboxers. It's just keeping track of the tool set, remembering how to put stuff together, and if you come up with a really cool idea, not forgetting it later, which is why, for me, outside of the discussions here on the jam streams, I use the sound inventory spreadsheet. Again, it's kind of sounds silly, but it's a really good way to just manage what I'm learning. And I put everything that I learn in there so that I can refer back to in the future. In fact, I'm going to pull the sound inventory spreadsheet up now on my screen so I can add that technicality pattern. It's not in there. Let's see, where did I put it? Sound list. Technicality, I'm going to call this KK kick. So KK kick, not 3. You need to look at my sound legend for how I write all of these sounds. Oh, B. So B. KKBB. I think I talked about this when we were doing sound inventory discussion before, but in this spreadsheet for the technicality patterns, I have them written out by sound. It's not formal beatbox sound notation that I really should learn better, but there's more of a formalized way people write out notation. My notation follows that kind of closely, but it's not exact. This is just how I remember the sounds, but I have a legend to remember what I put in here things like an inward K versus an outward K, how I note it in the patterns, just so I don't forget. And that comes in handy whenever I pull the list up after not looking at it for a while. And I got to remember, okay, this pattern is done this way, and here's what the notes mean. All right. So wrapping up the discussion on the machine gun sound, again, I'm going to think about ways to implement variations of the sound and things going forward, just because it's different. It's something different to practice. It's a tool that I don't normally use frequently. And that's why the discussion on sound theory and practice here isn't uncommon sounds in beatboxing as a whole, so much as uncommon sounds for my tool set. And I'd be curious to do this again, maybe in 6 months, and see if the underutilized or uncommon sounds that I normally put together change. If the ones that we talk about here become more prominent and other ones that I've been doing more become less prominent, I think that would be an interesting check just to see how things evolve, because they do evolve over time. And maybe something I could think about for content, maybe off stream, because it'd be difficult to do on stream. But maybe I could do like a beatboxing retrospective video where I go back through footage from the start of VTubing. I can't go back to the start of beatboxing in general because it was before I was making content here on the internet. But at least from debut till now, looking at a sampling of the beats and techniques and things I was doing and comparing. And not for the purpose of tooting my own horn. I really dislike doing that in general, but more of a way to kind of see how things have changed, because someone made a comment to me recently. It was, I don't know, last month, and said, it really sounds like you've gotten better at beatboxing, which was very flattering. And it was from someone I've known for a while. And to me, I don't hear it. You know, I don't really listen to my own beatboxing footage back unless I'm doing like a sound check or trying to remember something I talked about or did in the stream. I don't spend a lot of time scrutinizing what I do here on the jam streams, just because I don't like to hear myself that much. But I do think, if we think about how long I've been doing this, I did my debut in 21 in the spring of 2021. Come spring of 2024, that'll be 3 years. 3 years of beatboxing as part of my content and my stuff here on streams and on YouTube. But I started doing it in 2019. I think it was. It's been a while. And so you think 5 years of beatboxing come spring of 2024-ish. I started in the spring of 2019. I think the progression should be notable, specifically for the years I've been doing this here in front of everybody. We could look at things like the beatboxing from my original debut, which would be a bit of a trip to look at because it's been so long. It was with VTuber model 1.0. It was ages ago. But if we were to compare beatboxing then to things in the middle to the current day, I think that could be pretty interesting. And so the tricky thing would be getting footage, because I don't keep a running footage archive of all of my stuff. After I upload them to YouTube, because they take up a lot of space, I just delete them. But I can go and download them again from YouTube. It's fine. I can just rip down the HD versions of footage and cut out what I need. So that could be something to think about for a future video idea or something. Again, just to look through the past and see how things have evolved and changed. So I will keep that in mind. All right, before we wrap up sound theory and practice discussion about uncommon sounds, I did briefly mention one when we were talking about the machine gun that I guess I can talk about here. It's going to be a really difficult example to show because I'm not super good at it, and it's a sound I definitely don't use a lot, and that's OD bass. OD bass is kind of unique compared to the other ones. It's not vocalized. It's kind of similar to tongue bass. It's done the same way, but it's such a unique sound, and it's really neat. It's just not one I readily think to use because I'm not good at it. So I need to practice it more. And I believe OD bass was invented by Amit from the Beatbox house in the States. I'm pretty sure because he's the one I first heard doing the sound a long time ago. But it uses the tongue and it uses mouth pressure. And it's kind of a cousin to tongue bass, I would think. And similar to the machine gun too, which is why it popped into my brain. But OD bass sounds like, let's see. It's been forever since I've even done it. Now I got to kind of think about how to actually do the sound. Because I know what it sounds like. Regular tongue bass. I got to think about this for a second. This one was not part of my lesson plan, which is why it's coming up now. Let me think about that for a sec. Well, I think I forgot how to do that sound. I remember what it sounds like and the tongue position for it, but right at the moment, it's escaping me how to actually do it. It's mouth pressure and it's a tongue reverberation that sounds like a bass. It's very kind of unique. I've done it before. It's been a really long time since I've talked about it here. Let me think about it for a second, and I don't want to waste time. I can always put a pin in this and lump it into a future discussion about bass. That's funny. I thought of the sound, and then now I can't think about how to do the sound. Let me think for another second here. All right, I got it, but it's a bit weak. It's basically un a non-breathing tongue reverberation sound, and it sounds like it's gonna sound faint and just kind of rattly, like kind of like a tongue bass that's not done very strongly, and that's because I don't do the sound at all. But the sounds like kind of like a ripple or a roll. If you develop this sound, it'll sound like a really strong, low, like intense type of sound. It's very unusual, but because I don't do a lot of tongue bass in any of my routines, anything kind of related to it just kind of gets shuffled to the back. But I had to really dig because I haven't done OD bass in so long. But it's also connected to throat hollowing as well. When you are doing the sound with your tongue, if you open your throat up to hollow it, it gets even lower and more kind of reverberating and echoey, and that's what sounds cool. I'm not good at it, so my attempts here are not really demonstrating the power of that particular sound. But OD bass is cool. Maybe I need to practice that one more and try and work on incorporating it into the arsenal, because it doesn't use your vocal cords. It's very unusual to describe, actually. That's why it took me so long to remember how to do it. But I have to think how I would even teach it, just because the motion of it's so weird. You're essentially using mouth pressure to create enough pressure to get your tongue to vibrate without breathing out, and that's really hard to describe, because when you breathe out, you get the tongue rolling. That's using your lungs, but OD bass doesn't do that. It does it with mouth pressure. That may need to be something I invest some time in getting better at, so I can teach it, because that's not really a common technique. It was more popular, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago or so, when I was getting into beatboxing, or at least watching it. But I don't really hear it that often anymore. In fact, I'm a bit disconnected from the trends in current beatboxing, because I don't watch as much content and videos around beatboxing. And that's not because I'm not interested in it. It's because I don't want to be subliminally ripping off someone's sound, which kind of sucks, because there's a lot of beatboxers that I really like to watch, but I don't want it to sound like I'm just grabbing their techniques and biting. But I check in every once in a while. I think GBB is this month. in October. So I'll probably be checking out the footage from that. I'm curious to see who's competing this year. But yeah, fascinating. I'm gonna have to revisit OD bass because that's the first time I've ever had a mental fart and been unable to remember how to do a technique. Between that and the inward click roll for quote unquote bass and low end type sounds, I think those would be two to focus on. I think I mentioned in maybe it was the last stream we did here, but one of my resolutions for 2024 is going to be trying to get better with the inward click roll and using it in things because it's a powerful bass tool. It's not one I use. And OD bass is kind of the same way. So we can definitely give that some thought, and I'll revisit that in a future jam stream when I feel like I can do it better and talk about it better. But the fact that it took me like 3 minutes to remember how to even do the technique is unusual and a little embarrassing, but that's okay. All right, with that, let's go ahead and switch gears and work on some BGM stuff. Wanted to make sure and allocate adequate time today to coming up with some BGM ideas and messing around with the loop. So let me change caption, then I will explain kind of what I'm looking at doing today. All right, first let me turn on the synth. It'll be an audible sort of pop when it turns on. Check the sound. Okay, everything is hooked up there. So just like we've done in the past, and this is going to be probably my format for the foreseeable future when it comes to messing around with the loop. I do at some point want to circle back to doing almost more dedicated beatbox specific BGM practice. That's more for the performance aspect as opposed to the future project aspect. But having the synthesizers hooked up is pretty handy for giving me a lot of tools to work with when it comes to recording things with the loop. This is Synthesizer Kun here, the big one. I haven't hooked up Casio-tron in a while just because it's, one, a little unwieldy because I have to put it on the other side of my desk, and two, the sound set is not as diverse. It's a smaller synthesizer, it's very old, and it's essentially just kind of a more complex MIDI keyboard, but it's good and has slightly different instruments than the main synthesizer, but much less of them. The big synthesizer here, I think, has like 800 total instruments, and we've used a lot of them for creating BGM and loops and whatnot, and there's still a lot more that I'm learning about it. It's too bad there isn't a way to connect it to the internet and like download new sound sets or whatever. Even though it's much more modern of a synthesizer than the Casio, this one doesn't, as far as I could tell, I looked it up, it doesn't have like active software updates, I don't think. Specifically, I look for sound packs or something for this particular model. I don't think it does that, but probably not that necessary. Maybe if I ever upgrade to another synthesizer in the future, I'll look for one that has connectivity so that I can go and get more instruments for it. Because what I'd really like is some modern electronic tools and instrument presets. If I could get the two things I've talked about before, two types of instrumentation I would really like to be able to either be able to replicate with the synthesizer or just have at my disposal. The first is a chiptune preset. I really want to get into making chiptune, and I think I'm going to have to learn another software in order to do that. I started learning it in Cubase, but I think you can do it in FL Studio too. Those are two programs I would like to get into more, I just haven't had time. And then the other type of instrumentation I'd like would be Eurobeat synths. And I think I could probably figure out a way to take the ones on here and filter or alter them using the loop effects to get close. I just haven't been able to do it yet. That sort of really kind of sharp, prominent, almost overdriven synth you hear in like the runs and everything in Eurobeat music. As soon as I can figure out how to do that sound, I will be attempting to make Eurobeat music because it's a genre I like a lot. It's a lot of fun, and I think being able to do that could lead to a lot of interesting possibilities when it comes to creating music. But until then, we can still use all the tools at our disposal for the synthesizer to create some interesting things. And to that end, for today, I'm going to let me think about tone and style. Last time we attempted to create an electronic sound that was more like kind of darker and brooding, and it ended up being exactly the opposite. So maybe we go kind of lower minor key for this one and lower slash minor key and try and come up with something that's going to sound a bit more kind of dark and brooding because it is already October. It is spoopy month technically. And even though I'm done with all of the music for the upcoming Halloween release, we could still come up with some stuff that would be thematically relevant that could work for a future project or even a more standalone thing. So I'm going to attempt to do that. Just like before, I'll turn off the mic and the boosts and start putting things together. And then after I've completed the loop to the best of my ability, we'll come back, talk about it, and see what the results look like. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Let us reconvene and talk a little bit about what happened here. Let me make sure. Might be a little high. Let me turn my EQ down just a bit. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Okay. Interesting experiment in. Okay, I'm gonna lower all the levels of this stuff. Interesting experiment in an electronic type sound. Again, this one's supposed to be more darker and brooding. It definitely has more of a kind of moody tone compared to the last one I attempted to do. But it's still not like oppressively like, dark and ominous, which that's fine. It doesn't need to be a certain way when it comes to whatever it is I make here. But starting with the bass, the low tones here, I think that sort of sets the tone a bit. But maybe it's because I went up instead of just continually going down in the progression is why it didn't get like really kind of heavy. But if we take a listen. That one I used a distorted, overdriven guitar run through a filter, using the filter effects on input to get that kind of warbling, oscillating sound, a little bit of a muffle, and it makes it sound kind of more like a real distorted pedal when it comes to like a guitar sound. But I paired that with a couple other things. If you listen to it, I'll let it loop. Just let me know if it's too loud and you can't hear what I'm saying. Hey, first time chat from Gamer Coma. What's up, Gamer Coma? Welcome to the Jam stream, and good to see you. Hopefully your day is going well. You kind of jumped in the middle of BGM brainstorming. If you've never seen me do this before, basically it's me hooked up to my loop station and my synthesizer, which I turned off. That's why you hear that little pop earlier. And basically I mess around with my synthesizer and my loop station to create BGM ideas to put into future music releases, which are part of my royalty-free background music assets for streamers and content creators. And so a lot of times the things that we make here on these jam streams, I'd like to take ideas and feedback from the people that are hanging out in chat. And a lot of times they'll get to do things like give me suggestions for instruments. A lot of times they'll name the tracks for me too. And then when I release them in future projects, they'll be able to see the work that they help create. And so once again, welcome. Hopefully you're having, like I said, a good day, and this will be kind of a nice, chill, comfy vibe. All right. Gamer Coma says, making something spooky. Yeah, I tried. I don't think this one comes off as spooky. I don't know if you heard me running through the entire loop before you jumped on, but it's definitely a bit moody. But because of the combination of synths, which we'll talk about in a sec, it's not like really dark, ominous. I tried. I think I'm getting closer, but to that end, I will definitely want some input from everyone who's watching as far as what we can do to sort of tweak things. But first, I want to break down what I've recorded and then kind of paint a picture for what it is, and then we'll look at tweaking things. Gamer Coma says, as a horror fanatic, I have a good ear for horror. That's good. I'm going to have to probably rely on you for some good things that are indicative of kind of a more horror type vibe. But for now, let's see the different components and then think about ways we can sort of tweak things. And I can kind of demonstrate how the recording and stuff works for this particular setup. So let me play the first 2 tracks and then kind of talk through the other parts, since there's 5 total. The hardware I'm using is a Boss RC505 Loop Station Mark I. And basically it is a 5 quote-unquote track loop station capture device. Each track can be recorded and layered and looped, I think, infinitely. And you play them all together, and you can do different effects on the inputs that are going into the loop capture. And then there's different effects that we can do, and I'll demonstrate so you can hear it. Things at the track level that affect the sound. So I will demonstrate. But first, so we have the bass line. I usually go rhythm, bass, low end, then mid-high synth complements and other things, building out the tracks till we get 5 total things filled. But yeah, let me know if I need to tweak the volume. So for the rhythm, this one I didn't initially have an idea what I wanted for the rhythm. I went for this sort of slower, staggered kind of pace with the kicks and a single snare. I don't normally do that, but I think it ended up kind of giving almost like a dubstep-ish type of tempo, which is fine. And that sounds like this. And then if we move forward, next track is the first synth, which was a filtered wind whistle. I think I would remember what I captured, but here's what it sounds like. This one, I think it's a wind instrument, one of the whistles, or that might be the one after I'm thinking of. But it's basically the instrument run through the same filter with slightly different settings to change the oscillation for how it hits. And I tried to mess around with the melody to make it sort of complement the bass line. It's not the same notes, but it's kind of similar. Hopefully it doesn't get too horribly dissonant. Usually I can hear when it does that, and I'll fix it. Gamer Coma says, I'm starting to feel a bit of a vibe from this. Good. Vibes are expected and encouraged. Okay, next synth, track 4. I think I want this one a little bit lower in the mix and not quite as loud, because it could probably get grating on the ears. I also don't think I'd have this one playing constantly. I'd probably bring it in and out so that you hear it and then it goes away for a bit and then comes back. But everything is looping repeatedly, so that's why you're hearing it going off constantly. I could also turn it into a one-shot, kind of like a drum machine where I hit it on demand, but for now, I'll leave it the way it is because it syncs to the beat automatically when I leave it looped like that. And so the last track is an alternate synth melody that I think I would swap with the current one that's playing, the current high on track 3. And that one sounds like this. This one has a different rhythm, which is why I think it would probably want to swap with the one that I just turned off. Like for a part B or for a different part of the song, it's a different melody, and it's kind of a similar note progression. It's just 3 notes. It's 1, down another step, and down another step. Very simple, but I think it clashes a little bit with the other one. If we turn them on both at the same time, it sounds like this. Yeah. In fact, because they're so similar but slightly different, it muddies everything together when they're both played at the same time. Gamer Coma says, give me like a 2D horror game with a theme underwater facility before the start of horror begins. I could definitely see that. It's kind of more ambient and gives you an idea that you're going towards like something. So it's kind of more, I guess, portentous or ominous, but it's not overtly like, be terrified right now. Like, you will be terrified soon, if that makes sense. So if we paired this one with that simple oscillating synth line, it would sound like this, which could work too. These two don't clash, I think. I think the one I'm turning on and off can fit with either this one or the other one, but not all 3 at once, if that makes sense. Gamer Coma says, ambient and a bit aquatic vibe, like you're exploring the facility because you're new or told to go somewhere. Yeah, I definitely agree that the kind of feel is like an underwater-ish theme or like a submerged complex or like a ruin. Maybe not so much like a water temple like a Zelda, since it's very much more electronic versus kind of orchestral and symphonic in nature. But that kind of vibe, like BioShock adjacent vibes, I can kind of see it. Yeah, man-made structure under the water. I think that's pretty appropriate. So to kind of demonstrate the track level effects, which I was doing in the sort of practice run of putting the whole thing together, in addition to changing what happens when I input sounds into the loop, you can use different presets and effects with a ton of different options of customization to affect the entire track or tracks at once. And so if I wanted to put the whole thing through a filter, it would sound like this. And hopefully it's not affecting the way I'm speaking. You can still hear me explaining things. This one, low pass filter for this one. You can hear how it muffles and mutes everything. And these are dials that control the intensity of the effect. If I turn to the right, it takes that effect off. If I go back towards the left, it makes it even more intensely filtered and muted. And if I go back and forth and oscillate it, then it sounds like it's going kind of in and out, back and forth. Filter's great. I like the filter effect a lot. You can do so many things with it just by tweaking little settings within the effect itself. Another one, this one probably won't work well for this particular song, but you can do what's called a beat repeat, which takes a section of everything that's playing, and it repeats it. And this is taking everything, every track that's currently playing, and it's looping just that one section, and it's repeating it over and over again. And if you change the intensity of the effect, you can increase the speed at which it's repeating. And so for beat repeat, pretty handy for doing drops. This song doesn't really seem like it lends itself well to drops. But if we were to do something like this and take the effect off of everything except the rhythm, that's how you would structure a drop. And if we're going to do that, it would sound something like this, probably. Again, only the rhythm is repeating now. A little bit hard to hear if I crank it up all the way, but it's just going to keep repeating it faster and faster, and then if I turn it off, everything goes back to normal. I think the rapid kick would be the only thing I potentially use, but to the point of this being kind of like a more ambient type song, doing like an aggressive lead up to a drop doesn't really make sense here. I don't think it would sound appropriate, but that is how that works. It's pretty handy feature when it comes to things that you want to change rhythms or even change everything. Beat repeat's great for that. And so if we're thinking about how the song would be performed, which is usually the last thing I do before we kind of move on and get ready for the next one first, although what you'll see, Gamer Coma, if you tune into these streams, I am notoriously bad at saving my work. In fact, that has bit me a few times when I have put together something here and been happy with it, and then turned everything off at the end of the stream and realized I didn't save a single thing, which is very, very sad. So before I do anything else, I'm saving my work so that all the stuff here doesn't go to waste. But the last thing I do is think about how the song would be performed. And by performed, I mean actually laid out in its entirety from start to finish, since that's how I record these. I basically take all of the loops, figure out how I'm going to perform the song, and then when it's hooked up to my computer, I record everything basically in one take. So I have to kind of know what I want to do and what I want to turn on and off and effects. And then I record everything at once, and then that's what becomes rendered into the final song. So for this one, I'm thinking bass line and rhythm to start, to give the lead in of this kind of slow building, maybe not a suspense so much, but just kind of more of a mysterious type of sound. And then we let that run for a few bars. Then the first synth comes in, number 3. And then we maybe take number 4, the ascending one that has kind of like the beeping sound, have that come in, maybe go in and out for a couple staggered measures, and then that goes away. And then maybe do like a filter transition to muffle everything. And then when we come out of the filter transition, we swap the synths from 3 and 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and play all that out, and then we'll see kind of how it sounds. And then we should be good to move on to the next one. In the meantime, though, I would say think of a name for this thing. Since, again, for everyone watching on the stream, I always open it up to the floor first if anyone has names for the songs. And then if it sticks, then that's what goes into my file, and that's what it'll be named when it's eventually released. So, again, think of your name suggestions for this one, and then we will see how it ends up. All right. So to start, I'm gonna run through this. Probably won't talk a whole lot. I'm gonna just try and map out everything, and then we'll see how it sounds. All right. What I kind of thought for the outro there was to transition everything kind of out, drop the beat out so that you're hearing the bass line plus the synth, and then eventually the bass line fades out right at the end. So the last thing you're hearing is just sort of like the rhythmic beeping of the synth, and then that is the end of the track. So I think that's a good sort of rough outline for how we would go ahead and create the song from start to finish. I like the idea of a filter transition. I made the mistake of turning everything back off when I was demonstrating the beat repeat. So I had to quickly throw it back on everything so that all the tracks are getting muted by the filter. But other than that, I think it would work pretty fine. Gamer Coma says, thinking this is more fitting to a pixel type horror game, not gonna lie. My brain is going wild with ideas. Yeah, I could definitely see that too. Maybe like an indie kind of retro pixel horror game. Something like kind of like a deep sea expedition type of thing. I could definitely see it. So to that end, what do we want to call this thing? I think something with water, aquatic theming, I think fits really well. I like that idea. I could tell you based on suggestions if I have any other tracks that are similar in name, but before we wrap up, in fact, let me save this. I am open to suggestions, and I'll write it down. That's what I usually do, or I will forget. So what do we want to call this thing? I can tell you I have done a track that has the word depths in it. So we don't want that. We don't want to duplicate names. Let's see, where's my notepad? I'll put this under, for now, I'm going to put this under BGM 4.0. I don't know if it's going to be in that release, but it'll be there for the moment. We could do something, just thinking about ideas for a track name. We could do something like Sunken Melody. Do I have anything with the word deep in it? I don't have the word deep. I have depths for sure. That's from the RPG album. But I kind of like Sunken Melody. Thinking about the idea of like underwater ruins or something like that, I think could work. But again, open to suggestions. We'll give it like a minute or two, see if people have any ideas before we move on. In the meantime, I need to think about what I want to do for the second one. We'll do we'll do one more BGM track after this for the stream. Nope, you're going there. In fact, what I could do, just so I don't waste everybody's time, I'll leave the suggestions for the track name open. And if anybody comes up with something between now and the end of the stream, just drop it in the chat and we can take a look. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot. In the meantime, I'm going to copy everything into a new file, and I got to think about what I want to do for the next one. All right. So what I've done is I've created a new file on the loop. We're file 69. Nice. And I need to clear this one off. Reset all the levels and everything. Now for this one, I'm thinking something a bit higher energy. Maybe more of like a electronic dance-ish type of beat, but thematically, I don't know if we want to try and hit the target with the kind of dark and more ominous. Since I'm essentially like 0 for 2 so far, I think. Or we could try and go a different direction, or we could just start messing around with ideas and see what actually evolves. That's usually how I do this. I don't write this stuff in advance. It's really more just off the top of the dome, coming up with ideas and putting stuff together. So maybe we can do that. So just like the last time, I'm going to turn the mic off with the boosts and fire up the synth, and we will start putting stuff together and see what we get. All right. Let us reconvene and talk about what happened with this one. Well, I'm thinking today is just not the day for doing something really horror-ish, because this one was not really that horror-ish. To me, it sounds a bit more, again, kind of ambient. The tempo and pacing for this one's a little bit faster than the last one we did. But interestingly enough, and maybe it's just me, but this one sounds like if it was going to be from a game or something, it sounds like it's from the same title as the last one, just a different theme. Like, for example, it'd be like a complementary theme, at least to me, that's kind of the way it sounds. Which is interesting. That was not my intention when I was putting together the basics for the track itself. But it sounds kind of like to me, maybe like a labyrinth or like a dungeon theme. And part of what drives that is the rhythm. So let's kind of look at the components of the loop itself and kind of see how we put everything together. So the rhythm. Here, I'll try and turn this down so it's easier to hear me. The rhythm itself is a bit more rapid. It's using kind of more of a triplet-ish, not galloping per se, but kind of galloping adjacent type of rhythm. It implies kind of movement. Things are moving, which is why I was thinking it's like an exploration or a dungeon type theme. We add in the bass line. I'll let that repeat. One thing I like about the one particular synth I threw on here, it's the one I layered last, and it sounds kind of like a retro-ish, old school video game type of sound, and it's on the bass. I call that the Sunsoft synth, and it's from 329. We used it in the last track too, but this is the low end, and it's layered on top of the bass, which was a electronic synth bass, and I think just those two. But the quote-unquote Sunsoft bass, I call it that because it reminds me of the themes from the old school Sunsoft library, like Blaster Master or games like that. But it really kind of creates this retro-ish vibe, and I like it a lot. Need to be careful not to use it too much. But pairing that synth with the artificial electronic synth with low-end guitar to bass is how you're getting a lot of that kind of low resonance for the bass type sound. Here, I'll back that off a little bit so it's not too loud. But again, it's not really dark. It's not dark and ominous and brooding. It doesn't have that sort of feel to it. But to me, it kind of feels like you're going through some sort of environment that's unfamiliar. Maybe more of like a mysterious or uncertain type of feel as opposed to outright horror, which I think kind of blends in well for what this ended up becoming. It just wasn't what I was envisioning when I started. If we bring in the first synth. So this is a choir synth, which tends to work pretty well for a lot of kind of environmental and ambient sound. It works really well with horror stuff. A lot of the tracks for the upcoming Halloween release have some sort of version of the choir synth. This is the bass one. There's a whole bunch of different presets for like symphonic or orchestral choirs, and they all sound a little bit different. But adding in this particular synth almost gives the vibe of kind of like maybe like an altar or a temple. So it could be like temple ruins or some sort of quote-unquote holy-ish site, which again wasn't the intent, but it kind of contrasts well with the bass line. I think it just sounds like a different feel that complements. It's not, night and day different. Moving on to number 4. I think 4 is becoming my de facto slicer synth button. I don't normally do it that way for every song, But kind of like the last one, and this is probably why it sounds like these are from the same title, I took I think this might have been 329 again, and just run it through a 16th note slicer, and then had it complement the melody from the choir. So the choir synth has a progression, and this is pretty much the exact same. It's just a different rhythm because the effect is slicing it and making it rapid. It sounds like a beep, a signal beep. I think if we made sure this one wasn't super prominent in the mix, so it was overpowering everything, I think we could leave this one running and it wouldn't be really grating on the ears, kind of like the other one, if we just let it run constantly. And so as we were playing with the progression of the song, I think I did kind of like a rhythm drop. Gotta be careful how I structure these because I don't want them to be structured identically. We did something kind of like this last time, but we used a filter. So we could probably get away if we were going to pair these two themes, the one before and this one. As long as we didn't structure them the same way, then I think it should be fine. It won't sound redundant if they're played back to back or near each other in a playlist. But taking this combination, then we have the fifth and final synth, which I think I would swap with the chorus synth because the melody is a little different. So we bring that one in, it sounds like this. Fairly simple. This one's just two notes. It's two notes going upwards, and this is the Fantasia synth instrument, I believe. It sounds very kind of like ethereal and synthy. I think this has one of the effects I put on it. I don't remember which one. Maybe filter. Maybe not. Actually, this one might have been flanger. Very subtle, but the instrument itself sounds kind of like this chimey, sparkly, almost kind of synth. It's really cool for doing effects and melodies that sound like they're from like a PS1 era RPG. So if we take off the beeping synth so we can hear this a little bit more prominently. Again, kind of fitting into the idea that this sounds like some sort of environment that is enchanted, or maybe again kind of like the ruins of a holy site or a temple or altar, but you have to go through a bunch of labyrinths or catacombs to get there. That's what this one sounds like to me. And I'm actually going to need a particular song like this for the sequel to the RPG BGM pack, which I've talked a little bit about, but still very early on in its development. That's going to be next year. It's going to be at the beginning of 24, ideally, if everything works out. And I think we're gonna need, I gotta think. Could also use this as a potential like an ice cave theme. That's another one I need to record. So interestingly enough, let me go ahead and stop everything and save. It wasn't my intention to write something or put something together that could be used for that project. I was actually just trying to put random ideas together and see what evolved. But considering the holes I need to fill in the playlist for that project, I think that's where this one is going to go. So I don't need to worry too much about naming it here because it's going to have a name already. But that happens every once in a while on these streams. If I'm not working on something with a dedicated idea or theme in mind, but whatever we produce on the loop ends up fitting in line with one of the projects I'm actively working on, then I will shuffle it over there and kind of file it as something to go in that project, and you'll see it later. The things that are actively created with the help of chat and are more of a collaborative thing we're doing on the jam streams, those go into the BGM collection releases. To date, there's been 3 of them. The most recent one came out 2 months ago. Or was it in August? Might have been in August. I don't think it was in September. Either way, they usually come out once a year-ish or every 6 to 8 months. The BGM collections are purely driven by how many tracks we create and how many I have ready for an actual release. And everything else that's created is usually assigned to one of the themed projects that come out in between the BGM collections. So looking at the kind of milestone list for October, appropriately, the next one is going to be the Halloween themed pack. That's not set, don't have a set release date, but it'll be before Halloween, sometime this month in October. I'm talked a little bit about it. Some of the tracks for at least one we created here on stream a while back, so people who were there will probably recognize it. But no, I think at least two of the total playlist were created on stream with the help of chat. But I'm really excited for the Halloween project. It was really interesting to work on, and I'm pretty happy with how the tracks turned out. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, the theming is definitely more focused around kind of more of a darker horror type of vibe, hence a Halloween release. More so than anything we've done today, and that's what I'm kind of excited to show off because it was fun to work on those. But let me go ahead and do one final save here, and I think we will get ready to wrap it up for today. I'm gonna need to sit down. I keep saying I need to do this, and I really do. I need to sit down and do a massive recording dump from all the tracks that are on the loop into recordings to be used for different projects. Like I said before, we're on file 69. There's 99 total, and I think probably a third of those have already been recorded. So there's a decent amount of tracks across everything we've done that need to be recorded, mixed, and ready to be assigned to a project. So I will definitely, I'm going to have time to do that next, but hopefully in the next week or so I can pull a whole bunch of stuff off, and then I'll be able to repurpose them for an upcoming project. So to that end, we will go ahead and wrap up. Let me go check my list of people and see who's online to raid. We can go and spread some good vibes to other folks that are out there streaming. Let's see. I Eat Dirt is online. Oh, it's their anniversary today. I haven't rated I Eat Dirt in a while. We can go spread the vibes there and congratulate them on their anniversary. Okay, get that queued up. We'll go ahead and mute this and go to outro. And with that, we will wrap up for today. So once again, thanks to everyone who came by and hung out while we talked about Beatbox stuff and worked on some BGM ideas. I will be working on the schedule for next week when I have some time tonight. So it'll get posted on Twitter and on the community Discord at some point before the end of the day. Schedule's going to be a little bit weird next week because I'm essentially out of pocket for Monday, Tuesday. I think we'll probably do something like Thursday and weekend, or maybe Wednesday, Thursday. It'll be something I got to figure out because I won't be here as much. So we'll see. Might only do 2 days next week, but I'll figure it out. In the meantime, hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Now let's go see what I Eat Dirt's doing on their stream. Catch you folks later.